First of all, we want you to know what an altruistic act is. It is one that benefits the recipient of the act and it is intended to increase another's welfare, without any motive on the part of the altruist. Moreover, it deals with cost to the actor in terms of reproductive success. We will see in this chapter that self-sacrifice is nearly as common as breathing. What is surprising at this point is that the Darwinian view will be opposed to this claim, since the evolutionary theory holds that the only organisms that will prevail in the struggle for existence are those that look out for the number one, and thus the whole world will be populated with self-interest and self-serving organisms. So, if natural selection favors ruthless and self-interest organisms, why is here so much niceness in the world? Why do people and other animals risk their own necks to help individuals other than themselves? Evolutionary biologists call this the problem of altruism. The problem of altruism is the problem of explaining how altruism in the biological sense could evolve. Of course, humans can't look into one another's genomes and directly perceive who their kin are, any more than non-humans can. So animals started to follow certain implicit rules that in our ancestral past led us to favor kin over no kin 9 times out of 10. These rules are: be nice to anyone you live with as a juvenile and be nice to individuals who are similar to you. This last strategy is known as phenotype matching. So, like many other animals, humans seem to be especially willing to lend a helping hand to individuals they were raised with, and also humans seem to be especially willing to help individuals who resemble them more closely than the average person in their social environment. So, early life cohabitation and phenotypic similarity seem to function as kinship cues in our species, just as they do in many others. Therefore, altruistic acts evolve in order to favor our genes passing on the new generation. So it is interesting to point out that this is why we typically see acts of altruism towards no relatives as noble in the extreme but comparable acts among kin as a part of the course. Kinship is relevant not only in the West or even only in our species. It is important right across the living world. It is crucial to notice that in species that live in groups composed of both kin and no kin, individuals usually favor the former over the latter, and more altruistic towards closer kin than more distantly related kin. And not only are they more altruistic, they are less likely to harm close kin. This is because helping people who share your same genotype will increase your possibilities that your genes pass on the new generation. So ensuring their survival will ensure their reproduction, and therefore your probabilities that your genes arrive to the new generation. However, if you help indiscriminately, you will help in some occasions that your genes go past the next generation. But moreover, you will help rivals alleles going past the next generation too. So indiscriminate altruism won't actually help you. In fact, it will harm you because it will use up time and energy that could otherwise be spent doing something that definitely would help. So helping only your close genetic relatives will increase your population frequency and decrease that of your competing alleles. According to the Hamilton's rule, relatedness is not only the only one relevant variable that plays a role in altruism. We also need to factor in the benefits of altruism to the recipient, is to say, how many more offspring produce, and the cost of the altruism to the altruist. It was found that people have a stronger urge to help other individuals when relatedness is high. There are substantial benefits and low cost, and a weaker urge to help when these values are reversed.
The question is why we learn to favor kin over non-kin. The main reasons are that the importance of kinship is a human universal. We even favor kin when we try to eliminate it. Also, the nature-only perspective says that across cultures, people's behavior towards kin and non-kin vary randomly with respect to kin selection theory. This is not true. People everywhere favor kin. The second reason is that kin altruism is not unique to our species. It is even found in plants. Kin altruism also has to do with kin selection theory, which is an evolutionary strategy that favors the reproductive success of an organism's relatives, even at a cost to the organism's own survival and reproduction. In other words, we are naturally kind to non-relatives. In other species, it is difficult to find this type of behaviors, but in humans, it's a common thing. To understand the theory reciprocal altruism by Robert Rivers, we need to firstly distinguish between altruism and cooperation. On one hand, altruism benefits the recipient of the act but inflicts a cost on the actor. And on the other hand, cooperative act is one that benefits both parties. Also, cooperators generally do better and have more offspring than non-cooperators, so cooperation tends to evolve. Reciprocity works whenever two conditions are met. Benefits of helping to recipient are greater than the cost to the altruist, and the second one is recipient and altruist trade places from time to time. According to Rivers, human beings have a set of emotions and preferences that lead us to establish mutually profitable reciprocal relationships, avoiding getting too severely shortchanged by the free riders of the human world. For example, we dislike it when people take more than they give form parts of human nature. Also, anger at a person who cheated us motivates us to avoid getting cheated again. Other familiar emotions also make us naturally reciprocators. When someone does something good for us, we feel gratitude. This motivates us to return the favor later, thereby continuing the mutually beneficial cycle of reciprocal exchange. Also, we seem to be particularly prone to guilt when we've been caught doing wrong or when there's a good chance that we will be caught. Finally, when we come across a person in need, we feel sympathy, and the greater the need, the more sympathy we feel. Reciprocal altruism has been tested with computer simulations. Subjects had to submit computer programs which would play against other computer programs in a round-robin tournament. The programs would repeatedly encounter one another, and with each encounter the subject had to choose to either cooperate or defect. Once both programs had made their choices, they would be awarded as follows. Receiving help but not helping in return, they would receive 5 points. Mutual helping, they would receive 3 points. Mutual defection, 1 point. And helping but not receiving help in return, they would receive 0 points. The winner would be the program that accumulated the most points by the end of the tournament. In a one-shot game, the best move for both players is always to defect, and cooperation could never get off the ground. Rational pursuit of self-interest makes both parties worse off with this strategy. This phenomenon is called the strategy of the commons. The tit-for-tat program was one of the simplest strategies. All it did was cooperate on its first encounter with any other player, and thereafter simply match that player's last move. If the other player cooperated on the last move, tit-for-tat cooperated. If the other player defected, tit-for-tat defected right back. Among the results of the experiment, Trevor concluded that humans evolved to establish reciprocally altruistic partnerships where possible, but defended itself against cheats by refusing to cooperate with them further. Good behavior and a generous spirit are characteristics that pass into future generations in humans. Since the preference for altruism first evolved, we humans have selectively breathed ourselves into a nicer, more generous species than we would otherwise have been. To say that altruism is a product of sexual selection is not to say that it's necessarily motivated by the desire for sex. In fact, most of the time, it's not. People are just nice, but the reason we are nicer is that throughout the course of our evolution, kind, loyal, and generous people attracted more romantic interest than their cruel, traitorous, or selfish peers, and therefore reproduced more. It has been shown that altruism is a product of sexual selection. Helpers are signaling their fitness to the rest of the group, and their payoffs for their efforts is attracting mates and discouraging same-sex competitors.
Groupish animal. Some theories are based on explaining kindness and cooperation in other animals, but they don't focus so much on the human species. Here we have 3 examples, especially of human kindness and cooperation. First is extreme altruism. That is a type of altruism in which we put in a great risk our lives to save or help others, knowing that this behavior won't have any type of recompense or contribute in your attractiveness to sexual partners. A clear example would be when people donate organs to strangers. People often give up potential prize money in order to punish individuals who fail to contribute to a public good, as a way of benefiting the group and not them personally. This type is called a strong reciprocity. Finally, we can conclude that human beings are abnormally cooperative and groupish, and we tend to act oriented to the group. We live together relatively peacefully in groups of people. This is the so-called hyper-cooperativeness. These three types of kindness and cooperation of human species were selected not because they were good for the individuals, but because they were good for the groups that individuals belonged to, which means that they are products of group selection. The reasons that explain our hyper-social tendencies can be explained, for example, in extreme altruism. We could associate it to emotions that are products of natural selection. But extreme altruism itself is an occasional maladaptive byproduct of these emotions. We humans don't have an evolved motivation to help strangers, but we have a relatively generalized willingness to help others that often produce adaptive behaviors but sometimes doesn't. Strong reciprocity can be explained as a product of evolutionary mismatch. The groupishness cannot be explained just as a direct evidence of group selection, because we first know that cooperation by definition is good for all members involved, and also we humans practice much more cooperation than other species because we can perform more sophisticated forms of social organization. Also, we often cooperate in a large scale because we are motivated by considerations of self-interest. Is altruism just disguised self-interest? The extent that people are more altruistic than the standard sociobiological theories predict is probably a product of culture, not a group-level selection, but is questioned if our origins of altruistic tendencies imply that all altruism is, in reality, nothing but disguised self-interest. That is why George Price reasoned that the behavior we consider altruistic is really just a strategy which genes employ to propagate themselves and therefore isn't really altruistic at all. The claim that evolutionary psychology debunks altruism is deeply misguided. To understand why, we need to distinguish two possible interpretations. The first interpretation is that natural selection has made us selfish at a psychological level. From this perspective, we are never genuinely motivated to improve other people as an end in itself. We just do it as a means to a selfish end. The implicit rationale for goodness to others is gain for oneself. Even in the moral domain, in which sometimes seems to generally recommend unselfish behavior, self-interest control overall. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that we are so bad, because we do sometimes care about others, and this sometimes moves us to help them. But even then, helping is selfish because it makes us feel good. In short, altruism should be defined in the strange way that altruism involves doing something good for someone else and not enjoying it. But this won't make a differentiation between selfish and altruistic people. That is why nowadays is considered an altruistic person the one who does enjoy doing good for people, to make this distinction. The second interpretation is that altruism is a product of genetic self-interest. If we really are altruistic at the psychological level, this tendency still evolves as a way to pass on the genes, and thus it's still basically selfish. It's selfish, we might say, at the genetic level. According to Dawkins' metaphor, if altruism has an evolutionary origin, then the genes giving rise to it must have benefit from that behavior. But in conclusion, if we are now trying to say that altruistic behaviors are actually selfish, we have abandoned the original definition to altruism that explained it as an act that benefits the recipient at a cost to the actor. The notion of selfishness at a genetic level is an abstraction to capture the fact that genes underpinning altruism can proliferate as a result of that altruism. To assume otherwise is to mistake the metaphorical interest of the genes for the literal interest of the individuals possessing them. In conclusion, human beings often act altruistically, both in the everyday sense of the word and in the technical sense used by evolutionary biologists.